I'd like to welcome everyone to the FTC workshop, which is actually turned into the drivers meeting for the remote events that we're holding in January for the Freight Frenzy competition season. And I have two people who are going to be running this meeting. Maithri is one of our new alumni who has just joined our alumni group this year. And Kyle is the head referee. And so Maithri is here to help him, but Kyle will be the main one answering all your questions about remote play. And so I'm going to turn it over to them.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Christine. I'm Kyle, and welcome to the first remote drivers meeting of this season. So for those of you who competed last year, the remote event format will be familiar, but as a refresher and for the new teams, I'd like to talk a bit about how this is going to work. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. So first of all, this is the current schedule for the two remote events. If you need to switch events or have not yet registered, i.e. if you do not see yourself on the list you expect here, please contact Christine before tomorrow to fix that. Do we have representatives from each team here? No, we can't. There's not nearly enough. That's okay. That's why we're recording this. Next slide, please. Okay, so remote games have some key differences to the in-person event that you will have played in the end of last year. If you played in the previous season, the format will be essentially what you experienced then. So there's one robot at a time on a roughly half a field, as you can see in these diagrams. And there are no refs. You are responsible for recording and submitting your scores. I and the rest of the volunteer team are happy to answer questions, but ultimately we are not going to be having you submit videos and scoring it ourselves. You will be doing that side of things. As you can see, the field looks basically like a section of the full field from an in-person event. Next slide, please. That said, we recognize that not every team has an official field kit, and there is quite a range in what you can use for your field. At a minimum, you'll need the official shipping hub and scoring elements and some tape markings and a few other things. You can go from there, can get fancier anywhere up to the full half field that you saw in the previous image. The first website has the remote game manual and remote field requirements documents that have more details on what's required and recommendations for how to soup it up from the minimum requirements if you want. And also, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Next slide, please. So the schedule for this, today we're having the drivers meeting today, and then the matches will be submitted in 2 periods depending on which event you're registered for over the next 2 weeks. Teams will submit scores using the FTC scoring software during your event, and I would definitely encourage you, if you have not used that software before, to try it out before the day you're planning to record your actual matches and make sure you're comfortable with how that works. And if you decide to post and share video of your matches, we'd love to see what you've worked on, and I'm sure so would your fellow teams. So please share that link using the link that's posted here, which we'll put in the chat later, and we will make that available. Next question, please. Slide, please. Oh, thank you. Does anyone have questions about how remote events will work or this process in general?
You're welcome to unmute and ask your question, or you can just type it in the chat and we'll read it out.
And if you come up with questions after this event that you'd like to get answered, as it says there, you can submit them to the online question box and we will get you an answer.
Okay, so there's one comment. It says, "Hi, we didn't see our team on the list. We're 2341 Sheep Robotics."
I will check on it, but it probably means that your coach or mentor has not completed the January events form. And it's been emailed to them a couple of times now. Kyle, could you maybe talk about some of the common penalties that you saw at the events in November? Because the teams are going to have to assess their own penalties during the remote events.
Absolutely. That's a good idea. So there's a few common hotspots that we saw. Matthew, could we go back to the field diagram slide, please?
Sorry, it's not okay.
I normally use it through the app, not here.
There we go. Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. So one of the common issues we saw was teams bumping or moving the shipping hub. This will be less of an issue, I expect, with the shared shipping hub out of the picture and with only one robot on a field. But in general, be careful about some incidental contact is expected, but you shouldn't be significantly moving and certainly not deliberately moving the shipping hubs. That was probably the most common source of penalties we saw at the last event. Another thing that came up quite frequently was freight possession. Keep in mind that any piece of freight that's moving with your robot counts towards your one freight limit. So that's not just stuff held in your gripper, but freight that may have fallen onto your robot or caught under your wheels or something. If your robot is doing significant movement and that freight is coming with you, you are controlling that, and you can only have one of those at a time. There also keep in mind, speaking of freight, the warehouse operations rules. So as a reminder, your robot needs to start completely outside the outer boundary of the warehouse, move completely in and pick up one piece of freight, and then move completely back out. And that is, at that point, the freight is eligible to be scored. If you remove freight from the warehouse any other way, that is also a penalty, which we saw not infrequently. The last thing I want to talk about here is the carousel and the ducks. So there's a few things to keep in mind there. First of all, the carousel is optional. It's not part of the minimum requirements to have a field. That said, it is a valuable source of points. So if your robot has mechanisms to interact with the carousel, I would definitely encourage you to find or borrow a field where you can play with one. But in terms of penalties and using it appropriately, remember that the robot needs to spin the carousel strictly by touching the outer edge, and the ducks need to be delivered to the field one at a time by the robot. So the carousel's motion first needs to be stopped, then the team member places the duck on the carousel in contact with the bar, robot brings it onto the field, and only once that's complete can you place another duck. One more thing that came up there a couple of times is remember that you can only do that during the autonomous and the endgame periods. If you do that before the start of endgame in the driver controlled period, that is a major penalty. And sadly, we saw a couple of quite significant penalties for that. So those are the most common things we saw. Is there anything that people have specific questions about?
So I have a question. Should
Yeah.
there be 2 preloaded blocks put on the field at the beginning of the match, or just one because there's only one robot?
I believe it's just one. I will confirm that with the game manual.
I got another question.
Okay.
So, was touching the spinner before endgame a penalty?
One moment. First of all, to answer your question, Christine, only one preload block. Yes, that's correct. In terms of no, touching the carousel before endgame is not a penalty, but delivering a duck using it before endgame is.
Does that mean you're allowed to partially spin the duck before endgame, as long as it doesn't leave the carousel?
That's a good question.
It was a leading question, Kyle. Sorry.
Yes. Just confirming some definitions. Sorry. No, placing the duck on.
Looks like we've temporarily lost Kyle. Oh, Kyle might be back.
Sorry, my audio cut out for a moment. No, placing the duck on the carousel is part of the delivery process. You cannot do that until the endgame buzzer starts.
Okay, but the duck that's on the carousel from Autonomous is already sitting there.
That's right. So that one can be delivered during the autonomous period.
Can it be spun halfway during the first part of teleop?
That's a good question. I'm looking that up.
Okay. Have any teams tried running matches using the remote field yet? And if so, what was it like? What was different from when you were on the field in November?
Okay, Christine, to answer the duck questions, based on GS9, as I read this, the limit is the duck must not be delivered to the playing field floor before the start of the end game. So partially spinning it before that is allowed, but be careful.
Okay, this is a driver's meeting. It's a time for you guys to get to ask questions. If there's no questions, we will end up just wrapping it up early. The other thing to remember is never feel like you might be asking a dumb question. Chances are everybody is thinking the same question, or other people are, and they're just too afraid to ask.
Okay, we got some questions. If you don't have enough space for the driver's station, can you stand beside the carousel?
Let me see if the field requirements have anything to say about that. But in general, I would say that falls under you can do what you need to make your field work. Yes, looks like that is fine if that is where you have space to stand.
Okay, and another question is, does our half field have to have barriers on it?
There are two particular spots where you have to have barriers, and that is the sections of field wall next to the ends of the terrain. So those narrow gaps need to still be narrow. The rest of the barriers are optional, but there needs to be something blocking the in the place of the barrier on those two intervals. Can we go to the next slide, please, Matthew? If you see the two boxes here, those are the spots where a barrier is required. Sorry, to clarify, the boxes in the picture, not the diagram, are the ones I mean. The ones in the diagram are just supporting navigation targets.
So that picture is actually showing a field that a team has made, and it looks like they've used part of the Skystone field pipes, because that's why they're yellow and blue rather than solid black like the ones that come in this year's kit.
Yeah, the remote field requirements stuff from FIRST has a section about improvising terrain, including an option to repurpose the Skystone game elements. It's clever.
We have a question from Guild of Builders.
Hi.
Hi. We were wondering if all the freight is bunched up in like a tightly packed area, if it's acceptable for the robot to use its arm to sort of push the freight around to make it more easy to pick up one, or if that would count as controlling more than one at a time, if you say you push the pile of blocks and a number of them moved at the same time.
That's generally acceptable. There's certainly a line it could cross into being controlling too many. If I were calling that during a live match, it would be really a question of trying to judge the intent. Are you trying to get these out of the way, or are you trying to steer them to a specific place for a strategic advantage? Would be the question there. So in general, sticking your arm into a cluster of freight and pushing some out of the way to grab one would be acceptable.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
That
So-
said, if you push a cluster of freight, for example, out of the warehouse, that's not so acceptable.
Yeah, right. So if you sort of nudge the pile a bit, but it doesn't go out of the warehouse or move in a strategic way to score towards scoring or something, then it's just sort of part of the process of picking up freight.
Exactly. This is the difference between incidental contact or deliberate control.
Okay, thanks.
All right, another question here. Do we have to have the navigation images up?
No. If you don't plan to use them, you are welcome to skip them.
Okay, to answer the next question, is this being recorded? Yes, it is. If the balls roll out of the warehouse, is that a penalty?
not if it was inadvertent and inconsequential. So if, as Guild of Builders talked about, you nudged a ball while trying to collect another one and it clearly inadvertently causes another ball to go rolling out of the warehouse, that's likely not a penalty. If you are sitting in the warehouse golfing and building up a pile of balls that you're then going to go score, that's definitely a penalty. In between, again, it's a judgment call about intent, which is actually easier for sorry, my audio cut out again. I'm back now. So if the ball comes rolls out of the warehouse, that's not a penalty if it's inadvertent and inconsequential. If you are deliberately or strategically nudging those balls so that they go rolling out of the warehouse, that is a penalty for a violation of warehouse operations. But if it happens inadvertently while you're doing something else and you're not like building up a pile of them that way to then go score, that's likely fine. As with sticking your arm into a pile of freight, it's really a judgment call based on intent, which, funnily enough, you as the team scoring it have better insight into than us as separate refs. So don't do it deliberately, is what I would say.
Any more questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, I would like to thank Kyle and Maitri for running this drivers meeting today. It's a good opportunity for you guys to just think about what it's going to mean for you to have to score your own matches. And I know I wish you all good luck next week, mostly for those of you competing next week or the following week. My big request is please share some videos. We definitely want to see what your robots are doing. It is one of the reasons we all volunteer is that we love to see you, the teams and the robots. So keep that in mind, that you'll make all my volunteers very happy if you send in a video that we can share. Kyle, Maitri, did you guys have any final words for the teams?
I just wanted to echo the good luck out there and would love to see some videos of what you come up with. And feel free to send us questions if you come up with more things you'd like to know later, and I'll do my best to get you an answer quickly.
Nothing for me additional anyways, except have fun.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Right.